Hi, in this demonstration I'm going to work with a pivot table, and I'm using the same spreadsheet that we looked at previously. Before I get started, I just want to point out some things that are important when you create a pivot table. Number one, the data has to be consistent, so down the columns we need to make sure that all the cells are filled in with data. The data needs to have column headings across row 1, and also down each column we need to have logically the same type of data. So you can see down column B, that's my employee names, and down column F is the name of the pets, and down column I is the time that's required to perform the corresponding service that's indicated in column H. So this is the right structure to use whenever we're creating a pivot table. So what is a pivot table? A pivot table is a feature in Excel that allows us to change our perspective of the data to, you can think of it as rotating, thus the idea of pivot. Allows us to change our perspective, and it allows us to use certain columns and discard other columns that are clutter. So in this case, what I want to do, if you recall the problem I was having before, we have an employee named Spot who I think isn't really producing that much work, and whereas I might be able to see that at a glance with 24 rows of data, that might not be the case if I had thousands or a million rows of data. So what I'm going to do is set the spreadsheet up to transform, to rotate things so that I'm able to see the dates as column headings rather than just entries along the row. And for each one of these individual dates, I want to see the list of employees that were working. I want to see the services that they were performing. I want to see the time associated with the service they were performing, and I also want to see the sum total of all the time they spent working during any given date. Now, that's a lot to wrap your head around, I realize. So this problem will be demonstrated here in a moment, but probably the best way to do this now is just to understand that I want to group things by date. I want to group my employees by date and see how much work they're getting done each day. And that should give me some indication as to whether Spot is performing or not. So how do I create the pivot table? Well, again, with the data laid out the way I described, I need to place the cell pointer somewhere within the data set. And so I can place it anywhere so long as it's within the data set and it's only highlighting a single cell. Then once that's done, I'm going to go to the Insert tab, click on it, and on the Insert page in the very leftmost tool actually is a button called Pivot Table. If I click on it, it's going to tell me that it thinks the correct range is cell A1 through I-25, and that is in fact the range that I want to build this table from. And it also wants to create the pivot table on a different sheet, and I'm going to go ahead and let it do that as well. So I'll just say OK to the first dialog box, and when I do, I see the screen transform into an area over here where the pivot table is actually going to be built, and over here all the column headings, that would be the entries on row 1 of my spreadsheet, show up as field labels. And the idea is that I'm going to describe what fields I want to place in what dimension. So I want to have the employees listed day by day. So I'm going to move my date field to the row labels area, and it's beginning to build it right here. So there will be a grouping of data for one 2, 2013, another grouping for 1, 3, 2013, and so forth. So each one of those dates is going to act like a column heading here in a moment when I get this completed. For each day, I want to see what groomers were working, so I'm going to drag down and drop that right below. And now it's going to begin to take form. You can see that for each date, I can see the employees that were working. Spot's not working that day, nor that day. And each day, I want to see, and I want column headings to denote this, the kind of work that they're doing. In other words, the service that they're performing. So I'm going to drag the service performed down and drop it in the column label area. And then for each of the services that they perform, I want to know how many hours did they perform it. And then I also want to see some kind of aggregate over in the rightmost column. So the service time is the numeric field. I'm going to drag it down to the sum values area. And there you have it. It shows me on January 2nd, 2013, Dick, Jane, Sally, and Spot were all 4 working. And that on that date, Sally and Spot gave some pets a bath, and that on that date, Sally removed some claws, and you can see how that works out. And then over here on the left, it shows me the individual total hours worked. It also shows me the daily totals. Okay, so that's useful as well. And from that, I should be able to see more readily which employees are producing and which ones are not. Okay, so that's the idea of a pivot table. It's going to rotate the data to give you a new perspective, and it's going to allow you to display certain fields and filter out other fields, and then it's also going to allow you to do some kind of aggregate calculation. By default, that aggregate calculation is going to be a summation. And if you want, you can perform other calculations. So for instance, if I click on this down arrow, I'll get a pop-up menu with an option for value field settings. And if I make that selection, it allows me to change the calculation to some other function. So for instance, if I wanted an average rather than a total, I could choose average, OK, and it's going to recalculate, and now it's going to calculate average rather than total. Alright, that's the idea of a pivot table, and again, it's very useful when you have a large set of data. It helps you see things that you might not otherwise be able to comprehend with the normal row column perspective of things.